In most countries, when a river floods and thousands of homes are washed away, the government sends blankets, instant noodles, and a minister who makes empty promises. In North Korea, when the Yalu River floods and more than 4,000 houses and 3,000 hectares of farmland vanish underwater, the supreme leader visited the muddy disaster zone and decided it's time for a vegetable revolution. Comrades, this is not a joke. Our respected supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, has built the best greenhouse farm in the history of the Republic and allegedly solved the kingdom's food problem all at once. This revolution does not come with boring ideas like land reforms, market expansion, or fertilizer imports, but is about building the most advanced greenhouse farms and a vegetable research center. Now, those ordinary rice paddies and washed-out villages in Sinuiju have been replaced by a gigantic vegetable complex. Hundreds of hectares of shiny roofs, thousands of greenhouses lined up like a parade, a vegetable research center, warehouses, apartment blocks, even a new train station, so the tomatoes can depart their research center with pride and dignity. The whole city looks like a socialist salad bar. The supreme leader takes it very seriously. He keeps coming back to the site, inspecting pipes and seedlings with the kind of poker face other leaders reserve for military inspections. Elsewhere in the world, politicians cut ribbons at airports. In the kingdom, the supreme leader cuts ribbons in front of lettuce and cucumbers. In this episode, we follow the supreme leader's latest miracle project in Sinuiju, where disaster victims received the free, strongest greenhouse farm upgrade. We look at how a nuclear state ended up treating cucumbers like strategic assets, how greenhouses are supposed to rescue a nation from the lack of arable land, and how food in the kingdom is distributed by politics first and calories second. This is the story of North Korea's attempt to fight hunger with its leader's genius. But before we begin, it's time for our weekly rituals of expressing our sincere gratitude toward our loyal members. Your support ensures that we have the freshest vegetables and a strong mentality for video production. Thank you. Now, buckle up, let's dig in.
North Korea has completed the construction of a massive greenhouse farm. According to the regime state media earlier on this Monday, Kim Jong-un attended a related ceremony this past weekend. Kim had been pushing for the construction of a greenhouse farm in the area of Sinuiju, which had suffered severe flood damage in the year 2024.
Before we talk about miracle greenhouses and gigantic tomatoes, we need to talk about geography. This is not a Geography Now episode, but we must understand the root problem of North Korea's food insecurity. It starts with a simple yet annoying fact. North Korea has over 25 million mouths to feed, but most of its land isn't interested in growing anything. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, about 19% of North Korea's land is arable. That sounds okay until you learn about what the other 81% looks like. You get long chains of mountains like Hamgyong and Kumgang, high plateaus, and steep slopes that shed their soil whenever the rain gets heavier. On top of that, the climate behaves like the supreme leader's temper tantrum. Summers can be hot and wet, winters are long and cold, the growing season is short, and the same land has to deal with droughts one year and floods the next. The World Food Programme has been using the same polite phrase for years, saying North Korean agriculture is highly vulnerable to natural disasters. Meanwhile, the government's answer under the wise leadership of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il was industrialization. Importing trackers, terracing hills, building irrigation systems, damming rivers, and then pouring chemical fertilizer onto fields. This strategy worked for a while. In the 80s, average rice yields reportedly reached around 8 tons per hectare in some of the best years. That's quite amazing even by global standards. But here is a catch. This model ran on fuel and fertilizer imported from the Big Brother Soviet at subsidized rates. So in the 90s, the subsidy pipeline collapsed with the Soviet Union. Oil shipments dried up, fertilizer production stumbled, machinery broke down because those Korean engineers failed to manufacture the Soviet model spare parts. When trackers sat idle, the entire agricultural system collapsed. And that caused the infamous Great Famine, dubbed the Arduous March. This was not bad weather plus bad harvest, as North Korean propaganda claimed. It was a structural failure. The public distribution system, the proud socialist mechanism that delivered state rations to factories and neighborhoods, began shrinking. In some rural areas, the service simply disappeared. Rice yields fell down below 3 tons per hectare in some of the worst years, a sharp contrast to the Soviet-backed past glory. During the famine, millions were pushed into survival mode, and the state media started giving its citizens recipes like tree bark stew and wild grass soup. Fast forward to 2018, the arduous march was long gone, but the systematic food insecurity had never been addressed. A UN report found that after the worst harvest in 10 years, about 10.1 million people, that's about 40% of the population, faced severe food shortages. Total crop output of that year was around 4.9 million tons, leaving a gap of about 1.3 million tons, even after some humanitarian aid. At the same time, sanctions and isolation restrict the country's ability to import. Even if China and Russia are willing to ship grain or oil quietly, the imports are not enough to cover the shortage, and the system is in a constant survival mode. Besides, climate changes seem to be very real. In recent years, the pattern of once-in-a-while disasters has turned into regular programming. Severe droughts are followed by once-in-100-year floods that now seem to arrive every few years. Typhoons hit coastal provinces. Rivers like the Yalu and Tumen are overloaded. In 2024, floods along the Yalu reportedly destroyed thousands of homes and around 3,000 hectares of farmland in exactly the zone where the Sinuiju greenhouse complex now stands. People can rebuild their homes. One cannot rebuild a never-happened harvest to compensate for the lost harvest. Different decade, same problem. Limited land, bad weather, low yields, and shortages of fuel, fertilizer, good seed, and functioning machinery. And to make things worse, decades of over-acidifying fertilizer and the lack of crop rotation have ruined the arable soil, lowering the yield year by year. So, you have the picture. Unless Big Brother China is willing to subsidize Little Kim as the Soviet Union did, there isn't any easy way out. Oh, what about the Juche ideology and the marvelous supreme leadership? Unfortunately, the Juche idea cannot photosynthesize. The idea of agricultural self-reliance is practically a joke. But hey, do you still remember the 3 principles of Juche? Those are political independence, economic self-sustenance, and self-reliance in defense. Nothing about food. Clear? About the leadership, propaganda claims that General Kim Jong-il can use his will to move mountains. But still, he couldn't control the climate, couldn't conjure diesel, fertilizer, or any spare parts. Even the greatest dictator cannot dictate how the weather behaves. This is where Kim Jong-un's obsession with greenhouses begins to make sense. After all, it does look like a perfect Juche solution. If open fields are exposed to floods and droughts, you put a roof over them. If land is limited, you squeeze more out of every square meter. So, when floods wipe out homes and farmland, others see natural disasters, but our supreme leader sees opportunity.
North Korea has announced a recent typhoon forced some 68,000 people to abandon their homes, but the true number is reportedly much higher. A senior researcher at the Sejong Institute, citing a source who visits the North frequently, says the number of people displaced by Typhoon Lion Rock back in August was, in fact, around 300,000. Backing up this estimate are numerous photos.
The story of the strongest greenhouse farm starts, very appropriately, with everything being underwater. In late July 2024, an abnormal rainy climate hit the northwest of the kingdom. The Yalu River swelled past the warning line and kept going. Villages in North Pyongan province saw fields, houses, roads, and rail lines slip under muddy water. By the time the flood receded, North Korean statistics claimed more than 4,000 homes destroyed and over 3,000 hectares of farmland damaged in the Sinuiju area. To fight against natural disasters, the Workers' Party quickly announced a special decision to rebuild the disaster zone at the highest level. Other important state projects quietly had their manpower and materials transferred to the flood area. In total, they mobilized over 130,000 people, mostly soldiers, youth shock brigades, and construction workers. The victims themselves were sent to Pyongyang, temporarily housed and fed for months, while their new homes were hammered piece by piece on the Yalu riverbank. At first, the promise sounded very modest by North Korean standards. Brand new apartments to replace village houses, plus some solid embankments to hold back the next flood. For a rural county that would never normally get Pyongyang-style high-rises, this alone was a lottery win. But unexpectedly, Kim Jong-un visited there. Standing in front of the housing blocks, His Majesty announced that the farmland would not simply be restored. It would be upgraded into a massive, fully modern greenhouse complex, a socialist ideal village, a model farmland for a new era of DPRK agriculture. The petty paddy fields would not go back to growing ordinary rice and corn. They would become a vegetable city. Clearly, the Supreme Leader elevated this vegetable city project into the status of a new national pride. Workers broke the ground in February 2025. The official target: complete the entire complex in under a year, in time to be presented as a gift to the upcoming 9th Party Congress, which, spoiler alert, they succeeded. The entire design called for around 450 hectares of land, over 1,100 greenhouses of different types, plus a vegetable processing plant, cold storage facilities, a central vegetable research institute, hundreds of apartments, a hotel, and even a redesigned railway station upgraded from a small passenger stop into a combined passenger and freight hub, but for vegetables. The workforce was organized like a military campaign. Core construction was assigned to units from the Navy, Air Force, and the Paektu Hero Youth Shock Brigade, with local civilians and temporary teams filling in the gaps. Cement factories, steel mills, pump manufacturers, and valve factories across the country were told to prioritize deliveries to Sinuiju. Just a few weeks after the project's takeoff, the propaganda machine was already celebrating great achievements. Within 5 months, state media claimed that more than 1,100 greenhouse frames, the research center, housing blocks, and service buildings had their main structures finished. Quite remarkable, wasn't it? In a country where it takes years to repair a bridge, they can literally build a small vegetable city on a flooded sandbar in half a year under the supreme leader's supreme directives. According to the official narrative, this was not a big farm, but a smart integrated production system. The complex would have automated nutrient supply, recycling of waste solution, climate control, automatic spraying, multi-layer cultivation racks, electronic weighing systems, and its own nitrate production equipment. All of this, of course, was declared to be independently developed with the Juche spirit. Local technicians and managers were sent for training at existing greenhouse bases and research institutes. Engineers from agricultural committees, universities, and the State Academy of Sciences were drafted to design the user interface and control systems. This time, the People's Republic's agronomists were being treated like rocket scientists. It's all because of our respected supreme leader, who oversaw the entire operation as his personal pet project. He came back again and again, each time with new achievements and cameras in tow. In the summer, he inspected the early stages, when rows of steel frames were still bare skeletons, and the site looked more like a labour camp than a farm. He praised the speed, urged even faster work, and reminded everyone that this was not just about rebuilding, but about proving the superiority of the socialist system. In the autumn, he returned to walk through newly enclosed glass greenhouses and 3 giant semicircular hydroponic halls. He talked about the need to make the complex a national base, not just resourcing vegetables for locals. On another visit, he scolded the designers for the way some roads and courtyards had been laid out, saying they lacked harmony. By November 2025, state media reported that the leader was extremely satisfied with the progress and the perfect environment that had been created. Fast forward to 2026, Kim chose Sinuiju as his first on-site inspection of the year. It's tellingly interesting that he decided to visit a greenhouse over a missile plant or a tank unit. For now, food has finally become the state's priority. Then, it was the grand opening. The complex was officially declared complete on February 1, 2026. The 450-hectare project was described as another monumental creation of the Kim Jong-un era and a treasure island that embodies the party's love for the people. Kim praised the intelligent integrated system and said that greenhouse cultivation in the country should lead the world in both scale and methods. For a moment, loyal children of the kingdom almost forgot that they lived in a small, secluded and deeply sanctioned country and were celebrating this vegetable revolution. On television, it looked like a utopia. Drone shots of endless neat roofs surrounded by fresh embankments. Inside, long corridors of green, straight rows of tomatoes and cucumbers, workers in clean uniforms, and leaders smiling like this time the plan will work. Disaster had been turned into a showroom. The floodplain had become a national plan. But there is one small and somehow awkward question left. All of these vegetables have to go somewhere. Who gets them? How they are priced? Who benefits first? And who stays on the forever waiting list? As usual in the kingdom, everything, including your juicy cucumber, is decided by the system that sits on top of them.
Pyongyang reduced daily food rations for its citizens. According to the United Nations, the North Korean government cut everyday rations of items such as potatoes and corn from 400 grams per person to 300 starting July. The cut is due to drought in the regime and unfavorable grain imports from China.
If you followed the propaganda correctly, the kingdom should have already perfected its food distribution. It's called the Public Distribution System, or PDS. In theory, the state collects grain from cooperative farms, calculates national needs, and then redistributes everything fairly, according to occupation and merit. Soldiers, miners, construction workers, politicians, and the propaganda officers get more. Children, pensioners, and menial labourers get less. The exact food ration is published annually. Everyone knows their quota, and nobody goes hungry. But comrades, that's only in theory. The PDS is not a system that feeds the people, but rations scarcity. Your grain rations simply would not meet your energy needs. The World Food Programme suggests a standard daily ration of approximately 2,100 kilocalories per person. In the early 2000s, the same UN programme assessed that North Korea's public distribution system provided about 200 grams of grain per person per day. In conversion, if we presume people got white rice, 200 grams of rice contain about 700 kilocalories, about 1/3 of what a normal adult needs. However, to be fair, the rationing system wasn't always like this. Back in the Cold War era, the PDS was the backbone of the socialist welfare. Grain went first to cooperative farmers, who got annual shares immediately after the harvest, then to the non-farming population through redeemable coupons at state-run supply stores. It was a political diet plan supported by the subsidized Soviet oil. Soldiers and heavy industry workers could get as many as 900 grams per diem, party cadres around 700, and the tier gets lower and lower. The higher your status was, the more rice in your bowl. Very straightforward. Then, the socialist Big Brother collapsed. According to some academic studies, as the arduous march, the 90s Great Famine, unfolded, daily rations were slashed from 450 grams to 128 grams. And in the worst time, the state distribution system only reached 6% of the population. The remaining 94 had to source their food on their own. To survive the deadly famine, the socialist paradise reinvented something called the market. There came the jangmadang. People sold homemade noodles, foraged vegetables, goods traded from China, and anything that could be turned into grain. Over time, these markets became a fixture of the North Korean shadow economy by having fixed stalls, gates, concrete structures, and organized vendors. The government did what a self-dignified socialist state is supposed to do, trying to abolish them. Then they found it impossible and turned into taxing them. Eventually, they gave up and decided to pretend that those were Juche-inspired socialist markets, because these markets were so essential to the people's and the state's survival. The situation is not better off today. In 2019, after the worst harvest in 10 years, rations dropped to 300 grams per day, leaving 10.1 million people, around 40% of the population, classified as severely food insecure. On June 14, 2024, the unification minister from the fake Korea said, "North Korea's socialist rationing system has completely collapsed," during the National Assembly meeting. It's true. Ordinary North Koreans survive by going to the jangmadang, and the internal marketization looks like an irreversible trend. The DPRK food system exists like a hybrid monster. There are still central planners at the top, the state stocks, grain imports, and different kinds of foreign aid. These are controlled by ministries and party organs. They decide monthly ration levels, which cities get what, and how long reserves must last until the next harvest. In practice, there is always a food deficit, and the government's job is to decide who will feel the cut first. On the ground, there are semi-formal black markets. People trade their illicit food, like harvests from their kitchen gardens or secret plots on hillsides. Those with better jobs and higher state food quotas will sell their family surplus for daily necessities like clothes, rice cookers, or K-drama USB sticks. When the border is open, people sell beers and cigarettes to the Chinese traders in exchange for rice and instant noodles. North Korea thus practically has a dual system. The The state keeps the PDS alive enough to feed the army, core Pyongyang residents, and key sectors, like rocket scientists. It uses rationing and special distributions around holidays to show love for the people. Then, the markets handle much of the day-to-day survival for everyone else, while the state occasionally tries to tax, license, and abolish them. Food in North Korea is not about welfare, but control. Rations can be raised for favored groups, cut for peripheral regions, made more generous after loyalty campaigns, tightened when people misbehave. A full bowl is a reward, an empty one is a warning. Now, put this system next to the so-called vegetable revolution. Since the kingdom still claims to follow a planned economy, the obvious question is, will the state distribution system work any better this time? Will the Sinuiju mega greenhouse really send cucumbers and tomatoes to ordinary citizens? Or will they mostly circulate inside the same elite loops as exotic products from the Supreme Leader's pet project? It's hard to be optimistic. To answer the questions, we must understand what Kim Jong-un is trying to achieve with his broader food policy. Will he fundamentally change the system?
It's the spring planting season in North Korea, a country plagued by famine a decade ago, and where healthy food is often in short supply. Now, a shortage of donations to a key UN aid agency, the World Food Program, or WFP, has meant a big drop in the production of highly enriched biscuits and cereals, and that's having an impact on many of North Korea's school children.
What if I say the Sinuiju greenhouse farm is not a food revolution, but another publicity campaign by Kim? A mega greenhouse complex cannot solve the country's food shortage all at once. Even if they had enough veggies, what about corn, rice, potatoes, poultry, and dairy products? Kim Jong-un knows what he is doing, but will never say it out loud. Our supreme leader has 3 priorities. First, he wants absolute control of the kingdom, which means the country should avoid another famine. Second, he cared about his image. Kim is the beloved father of the nation who supposedly feeds everybody. He wants to build North Korea into a modern, advanced, and technological state, which will keep his subjects proud and pacified. Third, Kim wants to prove his own governing method. This point is a little bit abstract. We will likely do a future episode on different Kim's different leadership styles. But here is the catch. Kim Jong-un loves mega projects, especially those weird-shaped functionalist architectures. So, he wants to solve the structural food problem with his mega projects. The Sinuiju greenhouse is what happens when these 3 priorities are poured into concrete and covered with glass and plastic sheets. Let's start with the control. Our millennial leader, Kim Jong-un's formative political memory, is not the Korean War, but the Great Famine. He came of age while the state distribution system was collapsing, people were foraging in the hills, and families were desperately trying to cross rivers to survive. For his grandpa, the nightmare was foreign invasions and imperialism. But for Kim Jong-un, the horror is a country that looks powerful on paper, and then quietly runs out of food again. It thus makes sense to consider the Sinuiju greenhouse project as a psychological therapy, curing the nation from the trauma of natural disasters and great famine. A flood wipes out houses and farmland. Don't worry, under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, we turn disaster into infrastructure. Then, everything will be back in control, plus flood-resistant and high-yielding. He visits the site 6 times in half a year, more often than many factories see a minister in a decade. He criticizes road layouts, praises landscaping, and talks about nutrient recycling. This is not a normal leader behavior for any vegetable project. It signals Kim Jong-un's desire to control the country's food supply and thus controls the nation through the state distribution network. And the project certainly enforces loyalty as it heals the national trauma of food insecurity. Second, his image. Kim Jong-un is the international nuclear villain, the little rocket man in memes, and his kingdom is often ridiculed as a famine-stricken country where its citizens know nothing other than loyalty. However, domestically, the propaganda machine has crafted him a much more charming persona. His subjects are supposed to see him as the modern, scientific, caring leader of a 21st century powerful state. Over the last decade, he has built his image around construction and the slogan of practically improving people's living standards. His pet projects include Mireille Scientist Street, Ryomyong Street, Hwasong Street, new seaside resorts, the brand new Pyongyang General Hospital, children's palaces, and various amusement parks. The greenhouse fits perfectly into this builder persona and lets him visualize his food policy into city skyline. So, on TV, Kim is no longer just the man with binoculars watching missile launches. The handsomely young leader now stands in a greenhouse, listening to engineers explain hydroponics, while rows of veggies hang obediently under the roof. The technology story matters too. The regime repeats words like intelligent, integrated, recycling, and automation. There are control rooms, monitoring systems, and fur-coated technicians explaining nutrient mixes. Let me ask you, if you are the leader of a nation, for photo ops, would you rather stand in a muddy field yelling at cows, or walk through a controlled greenhouse that looks like an advanced laboratory? In the domestic narrative, it moves North Korea one step closer to being what it always claims to be, a scientifically advanced country that can solve its own problems based on the Juche idea. Finally, about his method of governance. Kim Jong-un governs through mega projects. When there is a housing shortage and a legitimacy problem, Kim doesn't quietly remodel the old units. Instead, he announces a national campaign to build 50,000 new units in Pyongyang, then unveils an entirely new district in one shot. When floods destroy farmlands, he does not slowly strengthen irrigation and soil conservation across rural provinces. He orders the strongest greenhouse farm in history and turns it into a national event. Small, boring reforms do not represent Kim's supreme leadership. They neither photograph well nor generate loyalty. A mega-project, instead, concentrates money, manpower, and attention. It leaves a visible legacy with Kim's fingerprints on it. By diverting national resources, they didn't just build an ideal socialist farm, but essentially a miniature city with apartments, a school, cultural halls, a research institute, and a new train station. The project was fast and controlled, easily framed as a gift to the people, and labelled as Kim Jong-un's achievement. This is the deeper logic of the Sinuiju greenhouse farm. I am not saying that the project is not about strengthening the country's food supply. Kim is not stupid and is genuinely worried about food. But he is more willing to invest resources against hunger than to reform the system that produced hunger in the first place. Instead of loosening control over land or giving farmers real autonomy, he puts agriculture into glass houses and lets it be controlled by the party. The problem is structural, but Kim's answer is architectural. The youth shock brigades and soldiers who built the complex get their own part in the story. They are told that their months of mud, cold, and concrete pouring are a glorious struggle that created a monument of Kim Jong-un's era. They get photographed with the supreme leader, and perhaps they become even more loyal. Seen from this angle, the greenhouse is less about solving one problem than showing the leader's ingenuity and genuine care for the people. It shows a leader who has learned from the famine, who takes food seriously, who is willing to spend real resources to avoid another arduous march, at least according to the state media and propaganda posters.
The South Korean government is sending tens of thousands of tangerines from the southern resort island of Jeju to North Korea. Seoul's gesture comes after the North gave South Korea 2 tons of pine mushrooms in September.
200 tons of Jeju delights, 20,000 boxes, 10 kilograms of tangerines in each, divvied up into 4 military cargo planes and sent to North Korea in a total of 4 shipments until Monday. South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade says they are a return present from the top office to North Korea after the North sent 2 tons of songi, or pine mushrooms, to Seoul in September.
In the late 1990s, during the famine, a young North Korean diplomat named Tae Yong-ho was working at the DPRK embassy in Denmark. His job was not drinking coffee and attending receptions like diplomats from other normal countries. By then, Pyongyang's embassies had become survival outposts. Diplomats were quietly told to bring in hard currency, food, anything that could help keep the regime afloat. Tae managed what his later reviewers politely called a major triumph. He convinced a Danish manufacturer to donate about 3,200 tons of expired feta cheese to North Korea. The cheese was very old, produced in early 1996, and exceeded its normal expiry date by more than 12 months by the time it sailed to North Korea. The kind-hearted Europeans even covered the shipment fee for this small mountain of protein and calcium. But by the time the cheese arrived in the kingdom, they didn't reach the malnourished children, hospitals, or any vulnerable groups. Once the shipment is inside North Korea, the diplomat's job is finished. The boxes of cheese disappeared into the state distribution system and reportedly were all allocated to loyal cadres' families in Pyongyang. In North Korea, anything scarce and slightly luxurious has a natural direction of travel, upwards. Here is another true story. From 1999 onward, the South Korean island of Jeju sent tens of thousands of tons of local products, mostly tangerines and carrots, to the northern cousins as humanitarian aid. It was branded as vitamin C diplomacy, a friendly gesture to provide citrus for children, a little bit of southern sunshine for the ever-hungry northerners. Guess what? Intelligence reports later told a completely different story. South Korean authorities found that large quantities of those Jeju tangerines, gifts to the North Korean children, were being siphoned off as presents from Kim Jong-il to high-ranking party and military officials. Tangerines, it turned out, became excellent loyalty snacks. Every valuable donation to the kingdom risks ending up in gift baskets for elites. Rice, medicine, powdered milk, and all sorts of aid goods followed the same route. They were never handed out to anonymous hungry families, but diverted to the military or sold by the party for extra cash. Put the cheese and the tangerines together, and the pattern becomes clear. In a country that worships authority and hates transparency, the state distribution system is not corrupt, but only functions upward. Food is power. A box of tangerines is not just vitamin C, it is Kim Jong-il's personal care to the military and its generals. Cheese is not only a source of protein, but a sign of status and stature. These small luxuries only flow upward and never trickle down. Now, fast forward to Kim Jong-un and his strongest greenhouse farm in the Republic's history. It's quite a different story, since the vegetables are not foreign aid, but homegrown. State media promises that these peppers and cucumbers will greatly contribute to improving the people's diet. That phrase sounds wonderfully egalitarian. It suggests that anonymous citizens all over the country are getting a fresher, healthier food option. But in reality, every train load from Sinuiju will pass through hands that understand its political value. An official who controls shipments to Pyongyang hospitals or schools knows that diverting a few boxes to his superior or to a special unit is not theft, but career insurance. The mayors and village heads know that sending a generous amount of these vegetables to a visiting delegation is a sign of prosperity and loyalty. The central authorities know that delivering crisp cucumbers and shiny bell peppers to model workers or soldiers right before a big political anniversary is much more useful than quietly supplying a remote county where loyalty is less useful. This is the bigger limitation of the greenhouse dream, not about climate or electricity, but about its crooked political system. A nation that truly wanted to eliminate food scarcity would try to make vegetables a boring, everyday option, along with dairy, meaty products, and enough grains. It should aim for a better world where everyone is quietly full and no one cares exactly which farm a tomato came from. The supreme leader actually never wanted it, and thus, the kingdom cannot afford this dream. If the bowl is always full, an extra ration then means nothing. If the bowl is always empty, there will be a riot. Kim envisioned a world where the bowl is half full, half empty, that can be topped up at any time with something labelled "gift from the leader." Scarcity, if managed carefully, is a powerful political tool. Ordinary people might still rely on cabbage and whatever they can find in the market, while select groups in Pyongyang and showcase cities receive greenhouse produce as a sign that they are special and important. Cheese, tangerines, cucumbers, or corn. It does not matter. In the kingdom, food flows along power, not along need. Seeing the drone footage, the Sinuiju greenhouse complex looks pretty reassuring. A neat block of bright roofs pressed against the Yalu, straight roads, clean lines, brand new buildings, the kind of orderly geometry people in other countries associate with advanced industrial parks. You probably have convinced yourself that North Korea has finally found a rational answer to hunger. Just build a few more of these and the problem goes away. In a better tomorrow, Sinuiju is not a one-off freak project. It's a template for all future vegetable parks. Each new disaster becomes an opportunity to prove the leader's wisdom and the system's efficiency. Nature attacks, the party responds, cameras roll, vegetables appear. The result is so comforting. You can mobilize a small army of workers, get a visible result in under a year, and claim a miracle. In this future, Pyongyang will continue to claim more and more miracles, with smiling citizens expressing gratitude to the supreme leader, who made their lives better and better. The country would remain tightly controlled. Cooperative farms still operate. People still grow potatoes on hillsides and cabbage in courtyards. The Jangmadang still carries Chinese noodles, local corn, contraband snacks, and whatever else happens to make it that year. For most people, the difference between yesterday and tomorrow will be measured in spoons. The public distribution system continues to feed the elite. The black market continues to do the invisible work. Scarcity never ends. Chronic shortage still. Fuller bowl this month, tighten your belt next month. Foreign aid continues to visit. Flour from Russia, fuel and grain from China, maybe another round of vitamin C for the children from stupid southerners who have not read the previous reports. From Kim Jong-un's point of view, this tomorrow is perfectly acceptable. The risk of another arduous march is reduced. The regime's loyal cadres eat a lot better than before. The countryside suffers in a managed way, not in a catastrophic way. The country looks more modern from satellite and in domestic news reports. And as long as the bowl is never completely full, gratitude still has room to grow. This is the future that the Sinuiju greenhouse project is pointing to. The system never changes.